Good day, everyone. I am Raymark Bosque, and we are the Group 5. Today, I'm going to discuss the distinguishing and constructing the various of paper and pencil test. Today, I'm going to overview what is paper and pencil test. We are concerned with developing objective tests for assessing the attainment of educational objectives based on Bloom's taxonomy. In this chapter, for this purpose, we restrict our attention to the following types of paper and pencil tests. Letter A, true, false items. Letter B, multiple choice type items. Letter C, matching items. Letter D, enumeration. Letter E, completion. And last, letter F, is essays. Development of paper and pencil tests requires careful planning and expertise in terms of actual test construction. The more seasoned teachers can produce true-false items that can test even higher or order thinking skills, not just rote memory learning. Essays are easier to construct than other types of objective tests, but the difficulty with which paper and pencil tests grades are derived from essay examination often discourage teachers from using particular form of examination in actual practice. Intend learning outcomes. Using completion of this module, the students should be able to construct paper and pencil tests in accordance with the guidelines in test construction. Learning resources and references. And lecture content summary of the lesson. Letter A. Planning a test and construction of table specifications. So, the important steps in planning for a test are: letter A. Identify test objectives. An objective test, if it is to be comprehensive, must cover the various levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Each objective consists of a statement of what is to be achieved, preferably by the students. I have example here. We want to construct a test on the topic subject-verb agreement in English for grade 4 class. The following are typically objectives: knowledge remembering, comprehension or understanding, application or applying, analysis or analyzing, evaluation or evaluating, synthesis, and creating. And number 1, in knowledge, the student must be able to identify the subject and verb in a given sentence. Number 2, in comprehensive, the students must be able to determine the appropriate form of verb to be used given the subject of a sentence. Number 3, application. The student must be able to write sentences observing rules on subject-verb agreement. Number 4, analysis. The student must be able to break down a given sentence into its subject or predicate. Number 5, evaluation. The students must be able to evaluate whether or not sentence observe rules on subject-verb agreement. And last, number 6, the students must be able to formulate rules to be followed regarding subject-verb agreement. Letter B. Deciding on type of objective test to be prepared. So, the test objectives guide the kind of objective test that will be designed and constructed by the teacher. For instance, the first 4 levels may be one to construct multiple choice type of test, while for application and judgment, we may opt to give an essay test. And letter C, preparing a table of specifications, or what we call TOS, a map that guides the teacher in constructing a test to ensure that there is balance between items that test lower level thinking skills in the test. The simplest TOS, consisting the 4 columns, a prototype table is shown below. So I'm going to show the TOS prototype. the knowledge comprehension, application, analysis, evaluation, and synthesis. Without the TOS, tendency for the test maker is to focus too much on facts and concept at the knowledge level. So, letter D, constructing the draft test design. The actual construction of the test items follows the TOS. As a general rule, it is advised that the actual number of items to be constructed in the draft should be double the desired number of items. For instance, if there are 5 knowledge level items that included in the final test form, then at least 10 knowledge level items should be included in draft. The subsequent tests try out the item analysis. So we'll most likely eliminate many of constructed items in the draft. Either they are too difficult or too easy non-discriminatory. Hence, it will be necessary to construct more items that will actually be included in the final test form. And letter E, try out and validation. The test draft is tried out to group or pupil or students. The purpose of this tryout is to determine the A, item characteristic through item analysis, and letter B, characteristics of the test itself, validity, reliability, and practicality. That would be all. And the discussant will explain the constructing and true false items and etc.
Yes. So the assigned topic given to us by our presenters is all about the constructing a true or false test. Binomial, choice or alternate response tests are tests that have only two options, such as true or false, right or wrong, yes or no, good or better, check or cross out, and so on. So, in this kind of binomial, or the two options that you're going to use in constructing various paper and pencil tests, is there are some rules of thumb in constructing true or false items. So in number one, or rule number one, do not give a hint in the body of question. Example, the Philippines gained its independence in 1898 and therefore celebrated in centennial year in 2000. Obviously, the answer is false because 100 years from 1898 is not 2000 but 1898. So, did you get it? And with that, this sentence is false. Next, rule number 2. Avoid using the words always, never, often, and other words that tend to be either always true or always false. Example of this is, Christmas always falls on a Sunday because it is a Sabbath day. Statements that use the word always are most always false. A test-wise student can easily guess his way through a test like this and get high scores even if he does not know everything or anything about the test. So, with that, we'll go on to rule number 3. Rule number 3, avoid long sentences. As these tend to be true, keep sentences short. So, when you're going to construct a sentences which is true, you need to use a short sentences but meaningful, or that is reliable. Next is about example with that is test to be valid, reliable, or what should I say? Meanwhile, reliable and useful, although it would require a great amount of time and effort to ensure that tests possess these test characteristics. Notice that the statement is true. However, we are also not sure which part of the sentence is deemed true by the student. It is just fortunate that in this case, all parts of the sentence are true and hence the entire sentence is true also. The following examples illustrates can go wrong in long sentences. So what I should say meanwhile is that short sentences but reliable is always true. Long sentences, which some of the students notice that there is an error in a sentences which is false. Examples with this is tests need to be valid, reliable, and useful sentences since it takes very little amount of time, money, and effort to construct tests with these characteristics. So, the first part of the sentence is true, but the second part is debatable and may in fact be false. Rule number 4. Avoid trick statements with some minor misleading word or spelling anomaly in its place, phrases, etc. A wise student who does not know the subject matter may detect this strategy and thus get the answer correctly. For example, The Raven was written by Edgar Allan Poe. Allan is misspelled and the answer would be false. This is an example of tricky but utterly useless item. So I will give you some examples about these tricky statements. The Trees by Joyce Calmer, which is not Calmer, which is Kilmer by Joyce Kilmer. That is some of the tricky words that may lead to a false. Rule number 5. Avoid quoting verbatim from reference materials or textbooks. This practice sends the wrong signal to the student that is necessary to memorize the textbook word for word, and thus acquisition of higher level thinking skills is not given due to importance. So we're going to avoid using the verbatim from references materials or textbooks because sometimes using this is such an utterly item which is not important in the sentences. You may use a short sentences but a meaningful ones, a reliable, a useful sentences is enough. Next is rule number 6. Avoid specific determiners or giveaway qualifiers. Students quickly learn that strongly worded statements are more likely to be false than true. For example, statements with never, no, or always. For example, never go away, in which your life will be go wrong or misleading to be wrong. Moderately worded statements are more likely to be true than false. Statements that are moderately worded use many, often, sometimes, generally, frequently, or some usually should be avoided. Executives usually suffer from hyperacidity. The statements tend to be correct. The word usually leads to the answer. Rule number 7. With true or false question, avoid a grossly disproportionate number of either true or false statement or even patterns in the occurrence of true or false. For example, your answer in number 1 is true, the next one is false, up to the last. 1 is true, then 2 up to 10 is false. or either you may use the pattern number 1 is true, number 2 is false, then alternate true, false, 1 up to 10. So that for ease of correction, teachers sometimes create a pattern of true or false answers. Students will sense it and it may arrive at a correct answer not because he or she really knows the answer but because he or she senses the pattern. So as I should say a while back, there is a pattern in using in true or false constructing a pencil and pencil test of using the true or false statement.
Making tests is never easy. Educators had been preparing modules and worksheets for the past few months in the preparation of opening of classes. A part of that is creating tests and questions. And if you are having a hard time creating test questions for summative or formative assessment, I think it's a good idea for me to give you a little knowledge. Hi there, if you are new here, I'm your future teacher Klang. So we're gonna focus on creating multiple choice tests. Multiple choice type of test offers the students with more than two options. It also consists two parts, which the STEM and the options. So we have 17 guidelines to be followed. The first one is do not use unfamiliar words, terms, and phrases. The ability of the item to discriminate or its level of difficulty should step from the subject matter, rather than from the wording of the question. Example, what would be the system reliability of a computer system whose slave and peripherals are connected in parallel circuits, and each one has a known time to failure probability of 0.05. A student completely unfamiliar with the words slave and peripherals. So, what would you think the effect of using unfamiliar words with your questions? Definitely, the students may not be able to answer correctly the question even if they knew the subject matter. Second guideline is do not use modifiers that are vague and whose meanings can differ from one person to the next, such as much, often, usually, and etc. Example, much of the process of photosynthesis takes place in the A. bark, B. leaf, C. stem. So instead of using those modifiers, it's better to use wordings that are familiar with the students because some students might not know the usage of other term for those qualifiers. So we now move on with the third guidelines, which is avoid complex or awkward word arrangement. Also, avoid use of negatives in the stem as this may add unnecessary comprehension difficulties. For example, as President of the Republic of the Philippines, Corazon Aquino would stand next to which President of the Philippine Republic subsequent to the 1986 EDSA Revolution. Better use who was the President of the Philippines after Corazon Aquino. So the effect of this is that the student may not be overact with the long stem or long question. Number 4 guidelines. Do not use negatives or double negatives such as statements tend to be confusing. It is better to use simpler sentences rather than sentences that would require expertise in grammatical construction. For example, which of the following will not cause inflation in the Philippine economy? Better use which of the following will not cause inflation in the Philippine economy. Fifth guidelines. Each item stem should be as short as possible. Otherwise, you risk testing more for reading and comprehension skills. Number 6, guidelines. These structures should be equally plausible and attractive. For example, the short story May Day's Eve was written by which Filipino author? A. Jose Garcia Villa. B. Nick Joaquin. C. Genova Edrosa Matote. D. Robert Frost. Or E. Edgar Allan Poe. If the structures had all been Filipino authors, the value of the item would be greatly increased. In these particular instances, only the first three carry the burden of the entire item, since the last two can be essentially discarded by the students. Number 7, guideline. All multiple choice options should be grammatically consistent with the stem. Number 8, the length, explicitness, or degree of technically of alternatives should not be the determinants of the correctness of the answer. The following is an example of this rule. If three angles of two triangles are congruent, then the triangles are A. Congruent whenever one of the sides of the triangles are congruent. B. Similar. C. Equiangular and therefore must also be congruent. And D. Equilateral if they are equiangular. So the correct choice B may be obvious from its length and explicitness alone. The other choices are long and tend to explain why they must be the correct choices, forcing the students to think that they are in fact not the correct answers. Guidelines. Avoid stems that reveal the answer to another item. One may arrive at a correct answer by looking at item A that gives the answer to item B. Number 10, guidelines. Avoid alternatives that are synonymous with others of those that include or overlap others. Example, what causes ice to transform from solid state to liquid state? A. Change in temperature. B. Change in pressure. C. Change in the chemical composition. Or D. Change in heat levels. So the options A and D are essentially the same, right? Thus, a student who spots these identical choices would right away narrow down the field of choices to A and B and C. The last distractor would play no significant role in increasing the value of the item. Number 11, guidelines. Avoid presenting sequence items in the same order as in the text. Number 12, avoid use of assumed qualifiers that many examinees may not be aware of. Number 13, guidelines to be considered of is avoid use of unnecessary words or phrases which are not relevant to the problem at hand, unless such discriminating ability is the primary intent of the evaluation. The item's value is particularly damaged if the unnecessary matter is designed to distract or mislead. Such items test the students' reading comprehension rather than knowledge of this subject matter. Sample question. The side opposite the 30-degree angle in right triangle is equal to half the length of the hypotenuse. If the sine of a 30 degree is 0.5 and its hypotenuse is 5, what is the length of the side opposite to the 30-degree angle? The sine of a 30-degree angle is really quite unnecessary, right? Since the first sentence already gives the method for finding the length of the side opposite the 30-degree angle. This is a case of a teacher who wants to make sure that no student in his class gets the wrong answer. Next guidelines is that avoid use of non-relevant sources of difficulty, such as requiring a complex calculation when only knowledge of a principle is being tested. Note, In the previous example, knowledge of the sine of the 30-degree angle would have led some students to use the sine formula for calculation, even if a simpler approach would have sufficed.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Marisa J. Dayag, one of your discussant for today. The task that they gave to me is all about matching type. The matching type items may be considered modified multiple choice type items, where the choices progressively reduce as one successfully matches the items on the left with the items on the right. Guidelines in constructing matching type of test. Here are some guidelines to observe in the formulation of good matching type of test. Number 1. Match homogeneous, not heterogeneous items. The items to match must be homogeneous. If you want your two students to match authors with the literary works, in one column will be authors and in the second column must be literary works. Don't insert nationality, for instance, with names or authors. That will not be a good item since it is obviously wrong. For example of homogeneous items, the items are all about the Filipino heroes, nothing more. To clear it out, I have here examples of match the column A with the items in column B. Number 2. The stem are no longer in construction than the options must be in the second column, while the option are usually shorter must be the second column. Number 3. The option must be more in number than the items to prevent the student from arriving at the answer by mere process of elimination. Number 4. To help the examinee find the answer easier, arrange the options alphabetically or chronologically. Number 5. Like any other test, the direction of the test must be given. The examinees must know exactly what to do. Supply type or constructed response type. Another useful device for testing lower order thinking skills is the supply type of tests. Like the multiple choice test, the items in this kind of test consist of stem and blank, where the students would write the correct answer. For example, the study of life and living organisms is called blank, meaning the supply type tests depend heavily on the way the stems are constructed. These tests allow for one and only one answer and hence often test only the student's knowledge. Completion type of tests. It is, however, possible to construct supply type of tests that will test higher order thinking as the following example shows. For example, write an appropriate synonym for each of the following. Each blank corresponds to a letter. Number 1 example is metamorphose. The appropriate synonym for the metamorphose is with change. It because with 6 letters. Second example is flourish. While this appropriate example is grow with the 4 letters. It's noticed that these questions require not only mere recall of words but also understanding of these words. Guidelines in the formulation of a completion type of tests. The following guidelines can help you formulate a completion type of test. The fill in the blank type. Number 1. Avoid over mutilated sentences like item number 1 below. Give enough juice to the students. Example, the blank produced by the blank is used by the green blank to change the blank and blank into blank. This process is called blank. Number 2. Avoid open-ended item. This should be only one acceptable answer. This item is open-ended, hence no good test item. Example, Ernest Hemingway wrote blank. Number 3. The blank should be at the end or near the end of the sentence. The question must first be asked before an answer is expected. Like the matching type of test, the stem with the question is packed must be in the first column. Number 4. Ask question on more significant item. trivial matter. Example, Jose Rizal was born on June blank 1861. There are other more significant items to us other than specific birth dates. Number 5. The length of the blanks must not suggest the answer, so better to make the blanks uniform in size. A part of speech that names persons, places, or things is blank. A word used to correct or connect clauses or sentences or to coordinate words in the same clause is called blank.
Hello everyone! Our topic for today is all about essay. These are the essay questions can be used to measure attainment of variety of objectives. Number 1 is comparing. This is a type of essay that provide points of comparison between two subjects. True to its name, it shows how the subjects are similar in certain respects and different in others. Number 2 is relating the cause and effect. This is a form of argumentative essay that details the effect relationship between two subjects. In standard cause and effect essay writing and academic papers, the author shows how one person, thing, idea, or event directly influences another person, idea, or event. Number 7. Classifying. In classification essay, we organize things into categories and give examples of things that fit into each category. For example, if you choose to write about types of computer, each of your developmental paragraphs will define the characteristics of a different computer type. Number 8. Applying. An admission or application essay, sometimes also called a personal statement of purpose, is an essay or other written by an applicant. Number 9. Analyzing. Usually concentrate on how the piece was written. For example, how certain themes present themselves in a story. Number 10. Evaluating. Evaluating, also called evaluative writing, evaluative essay or report, and critical evaluation essay. This is a type of argument that provides evidence to justify a writer's opinion about subject. Number 11. Creating. This is the 8-step creating essay. Number 1. Decide what kind of essay to write. Brainstorms your topic. Choose a writing style. Develop a thesis. Outline your essay. Write your essay. Edit your writing to check spelling and grammar.